Hey everyone, we're going to work through Murach C# exercise 7 to enhance the future value app. Remember, if these videos are helping you get through your semester, please hit subscribe. That will help me. And I have future value app opened from chapter 7. And let's take a look at this form. We're familiar with the future value app. We're just going to make it better. And we're going to look inside the calculate button. And we're going to add a try catch. So I'm going to hit Control KX to insert a snippet, go down to Visual C# and type try, and there's my try catch. Okay. Plus it's faster. Even though I explained it, I didn't have to write all that. And we're going to take all the code and put it into the try statement. I'm guessing the focus is actually kept on the outside. All right, to add a try catch statement that catches and handles any format exception or overflow exception. So instead of just capturing all exceptions, we're going to say that we want to catch what type of exception? We're looking for a format exception. And format exception means that one of these converts did not work. So we're just going to warn the user, messagebox.show. And I'm going to put this on multiple lines this time, because we're going to have a little bit of fun with messagebox.show. So format exception is, please enter a valid numeric format, something like that. And that's the message. The title is going to be, we'll say data entry error. Okay. So far that's what we know for messagebox.show. Messagebox.show, this method, we're sending two arguments to it, both strings. Don't forget the semicolon at the end here. Let's actually send, just for it to have some fun, let's send a third argument to this method. And the third one would be, what kind of buttons do you want to show on the message box? And when you say, please enter a valid numeric, yep, that's spelled right, format, really the only thing the user can do is click OK. All right, but there are other options here. We could say messagebox buttons dot OK cancel, yes, no, retry cancel, all this stuff. All right, in this case, only OK makes sense. And then the fourth argument would be message box icon, and you can choose what kind of icon you want to show here. Now I want to show an error icon because this was an error. So we just made our form a little bit smarter. And actually, let's run this just so you can see this. There we go. And because it's an error, you get a little ding and everything. There's your icon, and then my options are OK. That was the only button I could click. All right, so have fun with the message box. Just make sure you're using valid arguments here, things that make sense. All right, and then we also want an overflow exception. So I'm going to take all this code, copy, paste. Instead of capturing a format exception, we're capturing an overflow exception. And I'm going to say data overflow is the name of this box, and please enter smaller values. So in case you run this, I have no idea how we're going to get this overflow. If I put $100,000 away at 20% interest for 999 years, there we go, data overflow. Those are too big of numbers. If I do 112.1, that worked just fine. So overflow is when the numbers exceed the maximum size of the variables. So like a decimal can only be so large. Eventually, this math would exceed the size of a decimal. This part through the exception, that was called here within our try. It wasn't, and then, so this through the exception is a format exception? Nope. Is it an overflow exception? Yes, it was. So display this bit. Okay, and test. We tested. That was step 2. Step 3 is add another catch block to the try catch statement. Oh, we were smart. We left this one here. That displays the error message, captures any other exception. So we're going to messagebox.show. And what we're going to show is, this could be kind of long, so let me put it on multiple lines. And don't forget the semicolon. We're going to take the exception. Oh, this actually, it catches the exception and it stores it in this variable EX. And EX is one of the few times your variable name is not going to be meaningful. It's not going to be exception or something like that. It's just EX. That's kind of standard that exceptions are EX. And EX is that exception that you caught, and we can look at the message of that. All right, so I'm going to show the message, and then I'm just going to say exception error. Okay, so if it's a problem, but it's not this one and not that one, it's going to throw this exception, and it will show a certain message here. All right, and to test this, right before future value is called, we're going to throw a new exception. And we need to give that exception the message. So this is my test. That's my exception that I'm throwing. I'm throwing it just a test. The rest of the code is grayed out because Visual Studio knows no matter what, I'm throwing an exception here, so this code does not run. So this is a generic exception. It's not a format exception. It's not an overflow exception. It should be caught right here. It should show a message box with the message. The message is, this is my test. Let's see if this works. 112.1. This is my test. It threw that exception. Okay, I got to that point and threw the exception. All right, so that's working, but we need to finish up this exception. We're not just showing what the message is. Step 3 actually says, display the message in the exception object along with the exception type and the stack trace. So we're going to show the message and ex dot get type dot toString. Oh, let's put some new lines in here. All right, let's test this one out. So we're going to show the exception message, a blank line, or just after the message, and pretty much hit enter, and then show the type of exception. Sorry, mine opened over there. 112.1. That's my test, and it's a system exception. Which really, I like the idea of putting this in the title. All right, but we'll just keep going here. Let's make 2 blank lines instead of 1 on these things. And then we're going to show the stack trace, which is how do we get to this this point. Oops, forgot the plus there. All right, and you'll see this in action. 112.1. So this is my test, is the message. System exception is the type. And remember, get type returns a type, so we have to take that and make it a string. Blank lines, and then how did we get here? We got here from this file, line 21. And you can see in this file, line 21, that's where we threw the exception. Okay, so that actually finished step 3. Step 4 is this, test it out. And then we're going to comment this out. So right before it, //. So now this code is no longer grayed out because we're back to executing that code. That was step 4. So make sure you comment this out so your application runs. Don't delete it, because then your instructor will have no idea that you actually tested it. All right, let's move on to step 5. We're going to be writing a lot of code in step 5. We need some generic validation methods called isDecimal, isInt32, and isWithinRange. All right, we're going to start with isDecimal, and I'm reading what the book is saying. And isDecimal, in my mind, is going to return true or false, right? Because if I ask you, is this a decimal, your answer is going to be yes or no. That is the answer to, is this a decimal? However, the book wants you to return an error message if it's unsuccessful. So what does that mean if it's successful? Return nothing? That's exactly what it means. Return nothing. And not only are we returning a value, but we're taking in a value, but we're also taking in the label, not the label, but the text that describes the object that we're checking. All right. Maybe once we do the first one, the rest will make sense, but not a fan of the way this is working. All right, so isDecimal is going to return a string. It's going to take in a value, and it's going to take in how we describe that particular value. And it's going to return some sort of message. And we're going to start with the message being empty. And eventually we're going to return that message. And what we want to do here is try to take value and convert it into a decimal. If not, decimal.tryParse. So decimal.tryParse takes in some sort of input, which is value, and it then it puts the result of parsing that decimal in some sort of output. But the thing is, I don't care about the output. So I'm going to use this special underscore as my variable, which it puts the value in here, but then it just discards it. And tryParse returns true if it was successful, false if not. So if this was not successful, then I'm going to take my message, and that's going to say whatever the name variable is must be a valid decimal. So if we cannot convert this to a decimal, if we cannot convert whatever the string value is to a decimal, message is going to go from nothing to whatever the name is must be a valid decimal, and then we're going to return that message object. And I want to show you this in action, right? Instead of doing these convert to decimals, or not instead of, but right here, we're going to say string error messages is equal to nothing. And then error messages, we're going to add to it isDecimal, txt monthly investment dot text. This is described as monthly investment. And then I can say if error messages is not equal to nothing, there must be some error, so we can message box dot show error messages So this is how this is used. All right, and we would take this and run it not only on monthly investment, but also interest rate. So now when I run my code, and let's do monthly investment correct, but interest rate will screw up. Interest rate must be a valid decimal. Okay, so let's make that a valid decimal, and let's mess up that one. Monthly investment must be a valid decimal. Okay, 12. Just hold 1 year. So if things are valid, it works because error messages is nothing. Once we're done with all of our error checking, we see if error messages is still nothing. If it's not nothing, we have error messages, so show it. So again, isDecimal, I don't like the way that this works. It should be true or false, but this is what we're at. Okay, so we did isDecimal. Let's do isInt32, which is very similar to this. Let's just take this, copy it, paste it at the right spot. Okay, but instead of doing tryParse, I'm going to use a try statement. So I'm going to try int32.parse, and I'm going to parse the value. Just go ahead and try this and catch any exception. If we're here, int32.parse failed. So if it failed, we could put our error message in there. right? Whatever this thing is must be a valid integer. And get rid of that if. So these two things do similar work. This one's for decimal, this one's for int 32. Not sure which one is easier to understand, but two different ways of writing that method. Okay, and then let's go up here and use it. I'm going to take this line, copy, paste. Instead of is decimal, we want is int 32, because we're going to take in txt years, and this will be number of years. And now let's try this out. I know these two work. Number of years must be a valid integer. Let's try 12 and a half, 12.5. That's not an integer, so that failed. But 12 worked. All right, and let's just still make sure. Yep. Okay. Those are working just great. Those are two of them, and then is within range is similar to these in that we're going to take in a string and the name, similar to this, and a min and max. And not only does it have to be able to parse, but also has to be within the range. So this is so similar to is decimal. I'm going to copy that. I'm actually going to put it right after is decimal. Is within range. So not only does it take two strings, but it's also going to take a decimal of the minimum value and a decimal of the maximum value. We're going to flip this around. If we can parse it, and this is going to go into a new variable called number, then if number is less than min or number is greater than max, the error message is going to be name must be between the min value and the max value. And I'm missing a plus somewhere. Right here it looks like. I once again do not like this method because I would not have the string in the name here. I would make this a decimal because you're going to make sure that is decimal works before you check within if it is within range. So I think this is a terrible way to write this, but this is what the book wants me to do. All right, so we are going to call is within range. I'm going to take this error messages here, and now this is getting a little complicated because we have multiple rules here. I'm going to make sure monthly investment is within, let's say we can invest between $100 and $1,000 a month. So we make sure it's a decimal, and then we make sure it's within that range. Let's start with a valid value. We got to fill these in. Okay, 150 worked. 100 worked. 99, monthly investment must be between 100 and 1,000. 1,000 works. 1,001, too big. 1,001 penny doesn't work. So that is how we use is within range. And oddly enough, if you're doing this on your own without my video, there's not even, it doesn't even want you to put this code in to test it. It just wants you to write your methods. So I'm glad you're with me so we can actually write this stuff that tests it. Okay, step 6 is code is valid data that calls these methods that we created in step 5 to validate the data. So we're going to have one method called is valid data that basically does all this stuff. And is valid data actually returns a Boolean. I'm going to put it right here, right after my event handler, and before is decimal, I'm going to have is valid data. And we are going to start with is valid equals true. And then eventually we're going to return is valid. All right, and like we did up above, we need to have an error message. We're going to call our various functions, and then if the error message is nothing, we need to set our is valid to false. So anyhow, take this string error message is equals to nothing all the way down to the if error message is not equal to nothing and the stuff there, cut it, and put it into is invalid data. And where we've had return previously, we need to return false. Because if error message is not nothing, return false. Otherwise, we can return is valid, which is true. And quite honestly, we don't even need to use this is valid, right? We just know that it's going to be, if error messages is not nothing, there's some errors, so return false. And if you look at figure 712 of your book, it gives us like the ranges that we need to work with. So let's do this bit by bit. The first bit is validate the monthly investment. And the monthly investment needs to be between 1 and 1,000. Okay, again, I put that underscore there to help us understand that's 1,000, not 10,000 or anything like that. Validate the yearly interest rate. So yearly interest rate must be a decimal, and it also must be within a range. So let's make sure we're using interest rate. Interest rate is within range. It has to go from 1 to 20. So just make sure you have the right text boxes here, the right methods that we're calling. And then the number of years, I'll write this one out one more time. Error messages plus equals is within range txt years dot text number of years. It has to be between 1 and 40 years. And everything else stays the same. So we check these things. We add any error messages to this error messages string. And then if that error messages string is not empty, show that there's an error, return false. Otherwise, return true. Okay, and I don't need an else here. I don't need my code like this, because inside of our if, we already returned false. So we left this method. It doesn't matter that if we have this in an else or not. So let's get rid of the else. Clean our code that way. All right, that's great. We have is valid data. You can, again, look at figure 7-12 in your book if you need help with that. And then we actually need to call that is valid data. So I'm going to say if is valid data, then we're going to do all this stuff. All right, now, do I need an else here? I don't, because is valid data handles the message box.show for me, which again is something that really shouldn't happen. It should just either return true or false, but whatever. So I don't need an else up here. When I click on the calculate button, it calls is valid data. And let's check this out, show that it's working. All right, that has to be a valid decimal. Make it a really big number. It's too big. All right, what if we have like 2 things that are wrong? There we go. So we're getting multiple errors put in there at once. Great, that's what we want. What I don't like is, look how many times this is indented. Instead of saying if is valid data, I could say if not is valid data. And if it's not valid data, just return. Now all this stuff can be brought down a level. And now we just took all this code that was indented here and we brought it back one level. All right. If not is valid data, just get out of here. And we don't need, but maybe you're used to seeing curly brackets, right? When it's one statement, you don't need the curly brackets. Okay. So that's why my code, I can have it run on one line like that. All right. This one's taken a while. Let's see where we are. Test it. Okay. We tested it. Now, here's the thing, because we have these limits on it, right, from 1 to 1,020, and actually let's use the biggest numbers possible. 1,000, 20, 40. 1,000, 20, 40. It still gives us a number, 170 million, okay? Which means the overflow exception is not possible. We don't need this, all right? So let's comment that out. And I just selected the code and hit Control-K-C. Holding down Control, hit K, and then C, and then let go of Control. That'll comment out a block of code. So we don't have to worry about that. All right. We also are making sure that the numbers are decimal or int 32. So the format exception will never happen. We can comment that out. So this bit is exception handling, but all this stuff down here is data validation. And with data validation, it's you as the programmer who has a lot more control over the error messages and everything. Exception handling, kind of use that to catch anything else. But there should be no errors because we're validating everything. Okay, so that is the end. There's some testing and save it and submit it, but that is the end of 7.2, Enhance the Future Value app. Again, if this was useful to you, hit subscribe, please. That would be useful to me. And we'll see you in Chapter 8.